The other question is, if the president-elect is getting classified briefings as president-elect, why is he not in the loop if it had nothing to do with President Trump? Why is he not told what the informant is trying to do about finding any Russia connection in those briefings? One would think that he had briefings along the way.
He was briefed. The Hillary Clinton campaign was briefed. They were told that this was happening. And that people are questioning Trey Gowdy's, or they're impugning his integrity, his motive here today.
We're not. We're talking about it.
But I'm talking about his critics here. I'm talking about people calling him a phony, saying he's covering up for a corrupt FBI, because in the fever swamps and in tribal battle, people want to paint this like he's a secret Loretta Lynch, Hillary Clinton, Obama partisan fighting to cover up a corrupt FBI. He is doing this because he knows that what President Trump is doing is what Senator Warner describes. He's launching an assault on the intelligence community and the law enforcement agencies that we depend on in this country, and he's doing it knowingly. What is Rudy Giuliani running around telling reporters in town? The president thinks this is working. He's branded it Spygate. It's working. This is a campaign to discredit Bob Mueller's findings and nothing else. Trump knows there was no spy infiltrating his campaign. He knows that it wasn't him that they were after, that they were checking out Russians that were trying to get into his campaign and connect with his campaign. But he's doing it anyway. Okay, here you mentioned Senator Warner. Here's something else Senator Warner said about the investigation overall.
People have kind of got exhaustion from the day-to-day back and forth of this story. I think the American public will be tired of it if this is not wound down in this calendar year.
I mean, I think that's significant. He's part of the Intelligence Committee that was looking into this, who was really aggressive at the beginning and seems to be kind of saying, we got to wrap this thing up by the end of 2018, whether it's before the midterms or after.
Basically echoing the vice president from a few weeks ago, urging Robert Mueller to get this thing finished up soon. And I think it makes sense on some level. Investigations don't need to be unending and forever, which seems to be the standard that some Trump critics want in this case. It's a cloud that continues to hang over him. If the point is to prevent the Russians and other hostile powers from influencing our elections again in the future, as they attempted to do in 2016, it would be nice to know what happened before the next election. So what Warner said there, I think you're right, is significant. A Democrat saying, okay, let's go.
The other story, obviously the New York Times had this story, not a surprise to some people, that the president may have said, why don't you get back in the game, to Attorney General Sessions on his recusal. Here is the president on tape, and also Trey Gowdy weighing in on this.
Sessions should have never recused himself. And if he was going to recuse himself, he should have told me before he took the job, and I would have picked somebody else.
If I were the president and I picked someone to be the country's chief law enforcement officer, and they told me later, oh, by the way, I'm not going to be able to participate in the most important case in the office, I would be frustrated too.
Byron.
I think the sound you played from the president was from July of last year. Yeah. He's still mad about it. I mean, and he's always going to be mad about it, because he believes that the grounds that Sessions used to recuse himself were knowable before Sessions was even appointed Attorney General. And I think when Trey Gowdy said, hey, maybe the Sessions could have said, wait a minute, I'll have to recuse myself from this extremely important case. President is clearly still mad about it, but frustrated because the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, who would be responsible for confirming a successor as Attorney General, has basically said to the White House, I think we're busy. I don't think we can confirm another Attorney General.
That's where we are tonight. Next up, the big dinner date tonight as the Trump administration courts North Korea in New York.
The conversation is going to be focused on denuclearization of the peninsula. That's what these ongoing conversations taking place now will be centered on, as well as this summit that would take place in Singapore. And we're going to continue, as long as that is part of the discussion, we're going to continue to shoot for the June 12th and expect to do that.
Well, this will be the Secretary's third meeting with Kim Jong-chul. They've had obviously very deep conversations where they've talked about a lot of detail about what the United States expectations are. I think it's important that we're going up to New York.
Well, Secretary of State Pompeo is meeting currently with the North Korean official in New York, setting the table perhaps for a resuscitated summit in Singapore. We're back with the panel. Is there a feeling, AB, in town that that's going to get back on track?
Well, it's definitely back on track right now. I think that the goal of having the summit is a good one. I think the goal of having it in less than 2 weeks is probably likely to be derailed again. It's probably likely to be delayed. And why is that? Because if you look around at the skepticism from Prime Minister Abe, the Japanese government is very concerned about what this summit is really about. It was about a deal on full denuclearization. Doesn't look so much anymore. It looks like it's the beginning of talks. They're softening expectations and they're redefining what the summit deal would look like. Japanese are very worried about that. Are the Russians and the Chinese really playing their own games that in the next 11 days are going to put some roadblocks up? Or are they really trying to grease this the way that President Moon of South Korea is? So you have all these different players on the sidelines, a lot of rushing, and you need to get these agreements made before you get to the table. You don't get to the table for a surprise. You have agreements signed in advance. What are those, and will we get those from the North Koreans?
Speaking of the Russians, the Foreign Minister Lavrov said that he is leaving for Pyongyang tomorrow for a visit there, which kind of adds the whole aspect of Russia sticking its head in what was a U.S.-North Korean setup to maybe resuscitating these talks.
Another complicating factor, but I think we're getting closer to the substance now after these several days of this kind of drama. Is it on again? Is it off again? Will Kim get on an airplane? I mean, all this kind of logistical talk there's been. I think people are now talking about the differences between the two sides that remain really, really significant over the issue of denuclearization. I mean, can they actually, North Korea, actually agree to this? It appears that some of the leaders, at least, their national identity seems to depend on having nuclear weapons. And are they going to negotiate that away? So I think as it actually, the summit approaches as a reality, people are beginning to think, can that really be done?
What's your definition of denuclearize is really what it comes down to. Here is the president last night in Tennessee talking about his national security advisor.
They think he's so nasty and so tough that I have to hold him back, okay? It's pretty great. And he's doing a great job. You better get some rest because we have some pretty good negotiations coming up.
Talking about John Bolton there. Got to hold him back. He's pretty great.
Yeah.
That's what he says.
No, I mean, Trump's a showman, and that was funny last night. But I do enjoy, genuinely, I support the change in tone from the administration and really from the very top. When this June 12th date was first circled in Singapore, it's happening. I think there was some triumphalism about just the existence of this happening. And since then, it's been clawed back a little bit, where the president's adopted more of a tone of nonchalance. If it happens on June 12th, great. If it doesn't, no big deal. That's the posture that the U.S. ought to have coming to this, so it doesn't look like desperation to do any deal at all costs, which is the dynamic that I think put the Iran negotiations in the advantage of Tehran and not the United States.
Defense Secretary Mattis over in Hawaii and then over to Asia, also kind of setting the table with different officials over there, including the Japanese. And that's obviously a big concern, maybe calming them down, maybe.
Yeah, they are very concerned about what the pledges are coming from Kim. Are they genuine? And will the hopes, as I mentioned, of President Moon in South Korea be realized? What is the U.S.'s expectation? What are these agreements we could come to? There's a lot. And again, you know, the trade fight with the Chinese, there's a lot of stuff that's going on in addition to getting to the table on June 12th. And that's why I think that those complicating factors could not cancel it, but delay it again.
Well, we'll see tomorrow. Hopefully get an update from Secretary Pompeo about the meeting tonight. Panel, thank you. When we come back, a very good deed is rewarded. Finally tonight, Houston Texans star defensive end J.J. Watt can now add a doctorate degree to his list of achievements. The NFL All-Star received the honorary degree yesterday from the Baylor College of Medicine for the more than $37 million he raised for Hurricane Harvey recovery. The degree is typically given to those who provide exceptional service to the community. In addition to his work after Harvey, Watt also recently offered to pay for the funerals of all the Santa Fe High School shooting victims. He's encouraging others to give back to their communities.
I've had a lot of big dreams in my life, but not even I ever dreamt I'd become a doctor one day. To help bring out that inherent good in everyone around you. Help be that positive light. Help be that person that everybody else wants to be around. And help be that energy that takes this world into an even better place.
That is good stuff. Whenever we get the chance, we should lift folks like J.J. Watt up and just applaud. Congratulations, sir. Well done. You are inspiring others. Thanks for inviting us into your home tonight. That's it for this special report. Fair, balanced, and unafraid. Martha, I've got to get changed into a jersey here. There's a big game tonight.
Ooh,
and
yes,
I don't know.
there
DC.
Good luck to your Caps. I know you're a huge fan. I'll be rooting for you, Brett. And what a great guy J.J. Watt is. What an example he sets for everyone. Just remarkable. Good luck tonight, Brett.
Thanks, Brett.
Hope you score a lot of goals. Big night in New York City, but first, breaking tonight, the story making news again. Many in the media hailing Congressman Trey Gowdy's appearance here last night for apparently debunking what the president refers to as Spygate. Listen.
President Trump himself, in the Comey memo, said if anyone connected with my campaign was working with Russia, I want you to investigate it. And it sounds to me like that is exactly what the FBI did.
Our own Judge Andrew Napolitano joins us in a moment. He shared a similar opinion.
The Trump people think that the FBI had an undercover agent who inveigled his way into the campaign and was there as a spy on the campaign seem to be baseless. There's no evidence for that whatsoever.
Here is some of the strong reaction from the media.
President Trump's prior conspiracy theory, Spygate, was just debunked on Fox News by a GOP lawmaker, no less.
God bless Trey Gowdy for saying this, but the FBI did it by the book.
His remarks are astounding.
Judge Andrew Napolitano, he's a Fox News legal analyst, who has been a defender of the president through and through. He called the president's claim that the FBI placed an undercover spy in the campaign, quote, baseless.
Nothing to see here, guys. Chill. Earlier this evening, I got Judge Andrew Napolitano's reaction. Do you agree with the commentators that we just showed that you're calling out the president and basically debunking his theory of Spygate?
Well, I'm relying on the accuracy of what Trey Gowdy reported to you and what, candidly, he told me about before the show started, because he knew I was going to be on last night to comment on him. He has a top secret security clearance. He saw all these documents. Assuming he saw the right documents and wasn't misled by Deputy Attorney General Rosenstein or FBI Director Wray, which I think is extremely unlikely that they would have misled him, and he basically said, yes, the FBI used an informant, and they did that by the book. No, the FBI did not have a spy inside the campaign, as the president and his most articulate spokesperson these days on the legal side, former Mayor Giuliani, have been claiming. So, yes, I do agree with that.
But you and everybody else who's talked about this has said that a spy and an informant are basically the same thing, depending on which side of the fence you're on.
Yes. Yes. So a spy,
so why are they different
a spy
here?
is the other guy's informant. Right. An informant is your guy. But if by spy, because Rudy Giuliani said an FBI agent undercover, if by spy they mean a human being that is a government agent pretending to be somebody else on the inside of the campaign, where the right to privacy is protected, where the Fourth Amendment protects the conversations, they would need a search warrant for that.
You think that the Trump campaign believes that there was an FBI hired person working in the campaign?
Pretending to be somebody else, an agent of the government. For that, they'd need a search warrant. And that's what Trey Gowdy says there is zero evidence
I'm not sure that they have clearly said that they believe that it was someone who was being paid by the FBI and who was working in the campaign. Are they talking about the same person that we're all talking about? Someone who was on the periphery of the campaign, who was, basically emailing out of the blue Carter Page and George Papadopoulos and saying, hey, let's meet up. I'd like to talk to you. I mean, clearly fishing to see if the Russians were going after them. And there's no problem with that, but aren't we all talking about the same thing?
Not only is there no problem with that, it is unremarkable that we're talking about it, because the government does this all the time. Rudy Giuliani perfected this when he was the U.S. attorney, and it was upheld by the courts. You send somebody who may pretend to be someone other than they are to have a conversation in a public place. This is very important, because in a public place, the Fourth Amendment does not pertain. If somebody shows up and says, I want to work for the campaign, and makes his way to the inside, and that person is really an undercover FBI agent.
If some of these peripheral folks in the campaign were being approached by Russians? Did Russians come up to them and say, I've got some dirt on Hillary Clinton? And did they go back and forth on that?
Those are lawful
absolutely,
conversations.
absolutely. But here's what's different in this situation. This is the middle of a presidential campaign, right? Do any different rules apply, given the fact that the outcome of this moment is going to produce a new president of the United States? Did they have, and you said last night, that's a judgment call when I asked you about that. Did they have the onus on them to say, and as Trey Gowdy pointed out, the president said, look, if there's somebody infiltrating the campaign or there's somebody who's trying to, speak to my folks from Russia, I want to know about it. Why didn't they tell him about it?
I really don't know. I told you last night, if I were making the calls, I would have told either the candidate or the campaign manager. They made a judgment not to.
But what's the motivation not to?
Well, they haven't said. Either their presence was illicit or they felt that by telling more people than was necessary, the word would get out.
Well, how about this idea, that it dries up your lead into the campaign?
It may very well do that. And so that would be a very legitimate law enforcement-based reason for not announcing your presence. That's what I said.
When
It's
they
a
come across the
judgment call.
dossier, James Comey says he was compelled. He had to tell the president about that piece, but not any of the other stuff. So why did they make that judgment call and not the rest of the story?
Well, you're asking the wrong person. You'd have to ask Comey if he ever was willing to sit here. But as I told you last night, I disagree with their decision not to tell Trump, because if I were the candidate, I would want to know, wait a minute, my campaign is surrounded by the FBI and they claim they're here to protect me? I'd want to know about it.
And the reason that it raises all these questions for the president is because he knows that the people who were running the investigation were saying all these nasty things about him in their text messages all the time. So he's saying there's more to that than this. Yes, I understand that that's normal procedure.
If we're talking about the professor, whose name we're not supposed to use here, having conversations in public places with Carter Page, with Sam Clovis, with George Papadopoulos.
Right, nothing illegal about that.
Correct. But if we're talking about a human being who made it to the inside of the campaign, they thought this was a campaign worker and it was really an FBI agent, they need a search warrant for that. And for that, there is no evidence.
I got to ask you one quick question. Jeff Sessions, the president says, you know what? I shouldn't have hired him. There's a lot of good lawyers out there. Do you agree?
The president is right. It pains me to say it because he's been a friend of mine for 20 years. But the president is right. The president is entitled to an attorney general with whom he has an open conversation, an open level of communication with great confidence, sort of like Bobby and Jack Kennedy had, almost, even though Mitchell went to jail, like Nixon and Mitchell had, but an intimate level of communication, not one where the president is afraid of what he's saying to the AG.
Judge Napolitano, always good to see you, sir. Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Here now, Corey Lewandowski, former Trump campaign manager and author of Let Trump Be Trump. Corey, good to see you tonight. Thanks for being here. What is your take on that? Do you believe that the White House, that the president, when he talks about Spygate, is talking about a different individual who was embedded into the campaign at the behest of the FBI and who was an agent? Or is it your understanding that the White House is also talking about this professor who was questioning some sort of peripheral campaign members?
You know, I haven't spoken to the president about this directly, but it's my understanding, based on what, James Clapper has talked about, that he has admitted that they took government resources and tried to get information from the Trump campaign to, quote, protect the campaign from outside influence. And so the question was, is this an individual who was on the periphery? As you mentioned, this professor whom, as I ran the campaign for 18 months, had never met and don't believe I ever had any communication with. And he was trying to work his way through other individuals like Carter Page and George Papadopoulos, who also had no decision rights in the campaign whatsoever? Or did the FBI actually take somebody and put them on the inside of the campaign? And I don't think the president's ever alluded to the fact that the FBI has done this, but we know that Clapper has said that there were individuals, he doesn't want to use the term spying, right? But he said there were individuals who the government knew were trying to gain access to the Trump campaign, but were not gaining access to the Clinton campaign.
All right. Well, we know they said there was at least one. It's my understanding that everyone's talking about the same person, but maybe that'll prove to be wrong. Do you think the president's going to drop this term Spygate now, given the fact that Trey Gowdy and Judge Napolitano say that, that's just not the case?
Look, no. I think what we have to do is we have to get to the very bottom of this. We have seen lie after lie after lie from either Jim Comey or his former deputy, Andrew McCabe, and Strzok and Page, and we all saw that the FBI had some real problems in this, and if they were using government surveillance through the Pfizer court to spy on American citizens based on a dossier that was paid for by the Clinton campaign, and they didn't disclose that, that is Spygate and is a violation of the Fourth Amendment, and the American people should be very concerned.
What did you think about what the judge just said about Jeff Sessions?
Look, I think it's the president's prerogative to be able to choose an attorney general, much like I know he referenced Bobby Kennedy, but I also think of the relationship that Barack Obama and Eric Holder had. And Eric Holder was held in contempt of Congress. He was very public that he was then President Obama's wingman. He said it very publicly. They had a very close relationship, an unapologetic relationship. And I agree with the judge that that is the type of relationship that the president, the attorney general, should have for the very tight conversation.
The president tweeted today, there's a lot of good lawyers out there. I never should have picked Jeff Sessions. Is he about to fire him, do you think?
No, I don't think he's going to fire him, but I think the president's been very clear in his disappointment that Jeff had recused himself after he had been nominated without telling the president he was going to do that. And I think it was incumbent on then Senator Sessions to say, if I'm going to be appointed to this position, I cannot be involved if there's an investigation. That conversation, from what we know, never took place. And I think the president's disappointed in it.
I thought it was interesting that there was this big breaking news story last night that the president asked Jeff Sessions to reconsider his recusal, when really that is something that the president has never been shy about talking about. Watch this.
He should have certainly let us know if he was going to recuse himself, and we would have put a different attorney general in.
If he would have recused himself before the job, I would have said, thanks, Jeff, but I can't, I'm not going to take you.
If he was going to recuse himself, he should have told me prior to taking office, and I would have quite simply picked somebody else.
Been pretty clear on that, hasn't he?
Well, it's been the same breaking news for the last 15 months of his administration, that if he knew that Jeff Sessions was going to recuse himself from a potential investigation into the Russia hoax, then he wouldn't have appointed him. That's not breaking news. It's the same consistent message that this president has said basically from the day that Jeff recused himself.
Yeah, and even if, it's pretty clear that if he was urged to unrecuse himself, he said no, and he stuck around. So that was the outcome of that. Corey, stick around yourself for a moment, if you would, because also breaking this evening, the judge telling Michael Avenatti to, quote, stop the publicity tour. Unwelcome words for the TV regular. Stormy Daniels' attorney from a federal judge was issued this warning. If you want to represent Stormy Daniels in the federal probe into Trump attorney Michael Cohen, you got to knock off the TV appearances and the tweeting. So guess which one he picked? Chief National Correspondent Ed Henry, live tonight with more on Avenatti and what happened today in New York City, bombshell developments in the case of Michael Cohen. Hi, Ed.
That's right. Good to see you, Martha. Sex, lies, and audio tapes. Just some of the headlines out of the courtroom today, as well as shredded documents that the FBI and their officials were told are now trying to piece back together in this case, only giving more fodder to Michael Cohen's attorneys, who say that Michael Avenatti has created a circus atmosphere in this case. That's why they do not want him involved. Cohen's team using that point to argue that Avenatti should not be allowed to join the case involving the raid of Cohen's home and office, alleging he leaked sensitive bank records that revealed Cohen's consulting contracts, and that his practically nonstop cable TV appearances have included all kinds of misrepresentations. Now, Judge Kimball Woods seemed to give Cohen's team some credibility on that by warning Avenatti to stop his quote-unquote publicity tour on TV. So Avenatti ended up withdrawing his motion to participate in this particular court battle over the raid of Cohen's hotel and office, though Avenatti will still represent porn actress Stormy Daniels. True to form, when he left the courtroom, he quickly did more cable TV interviews and held a news conference where he hyped the idea that audio tapes recorded by Cohen are going to be as explosive as the Nixon tapes during Watergate. Now, Cohen's attorneys acknowledge he kept hours of audio tapes of his conversations with various people, Avenatti declaring he knows for a fact that President Trump's voice is on some of these tapes, though it is unclear exactly what was said and whether any of it was inappropriate. Listen.
We had Nixon tapes years ago, and now we have Trump tapes. Mr. Cohen's attorney was forced to admit that Michael Cohen was making recordings of various parties.
The president's voice is on the tapes.
That's our understanding.
And your client's voice is on the tapes.
My client's voice is not on the tapes, to the best of our knowledge.
Now, federal prosecutors also revealed today that Cohen, who's facing potential campaign finance and bank fraud charges, had a document shredder, and they need a few more weeks to basically reconstruct what may have been shredded. Remember, Judge Wood had appointed a special master to go through the documents to help Cohen and the president decide what might be privileged material. We're told that the retired judge doing that has gone through 13,000 pages already, but there's a whole lot more to go through, and the judge gave them a June 15th deadline to finish, Martha.
Ed, thank you very much. So Corey Lewandowski standing by. Corey, you know Michael Cohen very well. You spent a lot of time with him. Are there tapes? Has he talked to you about audio tapes, and is the president on them?
You know, I haven't spoken to Michael about it, but what we do know now is that, you know, Attorney Avenatti has one thing and one thing only that he wants to do, which is self-promotion. He had the opportunity to join this case, and the judge said either you can join the case and be quiet, or you can continue to go on television and promote yourself. And this is a man who I think was just settled a lawsuit for $10 million himself, Avenatti did. So his goal is to go out and get as much free publicity as he can by himself and not actually see any justice performed here.
But the reports were that the president was very upset when he heard about this raid on Cohen's office. So you, just one more time, are there tapes, and is the president on them?
Look, I don't know if there are tapes, and I don't know if the president's on them, but look, you have to think, in the history of our country, this is unparalleled, that this is unprecedented, that the president's personal attorney was raided by a government agency while he's sitting in office. Can you imagine for 1 second if the president, if it was President Obama and the Justice Department raided his own personal attorney? The media would be in uproar, and there has been very limited uproar. There's a very serious concern here about attorney-client privilege, and there is no question that at one period of time, Michael Cohen was the president's attorney, and the conversations that he had were with the president and are part of that attorney-client privilege, which Michael cannot reveal. That is up to the client to reveal, and Donald Trump, President Trump, was the client.
So if that's the case, there'll be a battle ahead on attorney-client privilege, to be sure. Corey, thank you. Good to see you tonight.
Thank you.
Coming up next, high drama just blocks from here in New York City. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is in town to sit down with a messenger at the highest level from North Korea. And what about China? How do trade talks play into all of this? The president's top economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, on the story next. So tonight, a dinner not far from here could decide the fate of the North Korea summit. You've got Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in town, and he is meeting with a top emissary as we speak from North Korea, a man who's been at the forefront of the attempted summit, Kim Jong-chol. June 12th was on, and then it blew up, and nobody knows if it will be happening or if it's going to be pushed later. So tonight, we wait. Meanwhile, trade talks are ongoing with China, a country that clearly has played a role in all of this. The president has said that intellectual property theft and trade imbalance will end. Here now, Larry Kudlow, director of the National Economic Council. Larry, good to see you tonight. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks, Martha. Appreciate it.
I guess, my first question is about the sort of balance that we've seen between the ongoing trade negotiations with China. President Trump said a week or so ago that he was suspicious about the second meeting that the North Korean leader had with President Xi. And then shortly, because he thought that sort of messed things up in a way. Then shortly after that, you had a ZTE deal that was reached. Now you've got this second sort of slam in the opposite direction with saying that you're going to have 25% tariffs on $50 billion of Chinese goods. So what's the connection of all these things, Larry?
Well, look, one thought. Right now, you've got absolutely crucial discussions and negotiations and communications virtually all over the globe. I mean, you mentioned North Korea and Secretary Pompeo operating there. Presumably the president will be over there in Singapore in a week or so. There's a G7 meeting coming up. There are European discussions with us about trade. There are NAFTA discussions with us about trade. There are Chinese discussions. President Trump is a change agent. He's trying to change a number of things, including unfair and illegal trading practices. He wants the U.S. to be treated fairly. He wants reciprocity. He wants peace. He wants peace and denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula. You know, these are breathtaking developments. I happen to think it's all to the good, and I think that the president is conducting himself in a terrific manner. And by the way, he doesn't always play by the norms of Washington.
No, which is why it's so fascinating to watch. And he does link trade with policy in a way that we typically haven't seen. So my question was, you know, do you think that the trade negotiation with China is a baseline for whether or not China is going to allow this North Korea talk to go forward? And you just said that you think he will be in Singapore on June 12th. Is the White House saying they believe this thing's back on?
Nothing's definite, so I don't want to get ahead of that curve.
Okay.
But I think the expectations are very encouraging. Look, China trade doesn't depend on Korea. Korea doesn't depend on China trade. I acknowledge that they may be linked in a grand landscape, if you will. But the China trade, look, United States needs China to get rid of these unfair and illegal trading practices. We can't let them steal our technology. We can't let them force us to give technology over. They have to drop tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers. Now, some progress is being made. Wilbur Ross, Secretary Ross, going to be over there. I think he's actually there now on crossing the date line. Progress has been made. Steve Mnuchin made progress. But the president, again, is emphasizing to the Chinese, as we've told them in person-to-person meetings, we are going to protect our family jewels. We are going to protect crucial, critical, strategic technologies, for example. We are going to put imports on China's that might steal those technologies. I think that's very important. We are going to demand that they change a lot of their policies and with respect to investment here in the United States. This is not new. The Chinese have heard this before. Their response, by the way, was quite mild because they have heard this before. But again, to get growth, to get more American exports, to get reciprocity with Europe, to get better trade deals with China, it'll help American jobs. It'll help America's employment and wages.
Understood.
But it has to be
I think
done.
it is fascinating to watch all of the different areas where so much work is being done. I guess, how far out do you think a trade deal with China is? Can you put an approximate time frame on it, Larry?
No, I wouldn't even try. I mean, this is a long process. It's a long negotiation. Part of those negotiations, as the president has said, there'll be times when he employs tariffs as an enforcement mechanism or maybe a negotiating mechanism. There are times when tariffs will not be used. These things have their ups and downs. There are cycles to this. No, I wouldn't want to put a deadline on that. I just hope that we continue making progress.
I'm short on time, but I want to get your reaction to one more thing. With regard to North Korea, there was a story that said that they plan to keep their nuclear weapons, but they are offering burger chains to open in North Korea.
It doesn't sound like a winner to me, but I'm not running the State Department, and I'm certainly not President Trump. Denuclearization is a very key part of the U.S. Demands. Burger Kings, fine. More the merrier, I guess.
Yeah,
but
well, I can see why if you're in North Korea, you'd want to have a Five Guys on the corner. You can kind of understand that, right?
North Koreans need food. There's no question about that.
Yeah,
they might get some help from us if they do denuclearize. That's a possibility.
We will see. Larry, thank you so much. Good to see you tonight.
Thank you.
So coming up, this is a very significant story here. I'm going to talk to a former NFL player who says that his career was ruined after he was expelled from graduate school following a sexual misconduct investigation, even though he was never charged with any crime. Plus, students in Parkland, Florida, set to graduate on Sunday. But many remain frustrated with politicians like Governor Rick Scott after the February 14th shooting that left 17 dead and 17 others wounded. The governor joins me next. So coming to us moments ago from the Broward County State Attorney's Office in Florida, you should know that there's a new chilling video that is out, and it appears to have been shot by the Parkland school shooter, and he's bragging about his plans. It was recorded the morning before he murdered 17 people and wounded 17 others. This is just a freeze frame from it. We are not going to show this to you. It is a sick attempt to gain attention. And we just simply are not going to put it on the air. Joining me now, Florida Governor Rick Scott, who has been working in his state to try to make sure that this never happens again. I guess initially, Governor, your thoughts on this latest piece of information?
It's disgusting. You know, it's just horrible. You think about these poor families. and I can't imagine if it happened to your, child or your grandchild. Our schools need to be safe. They need to, we all as parents want to make sure our kids are safe at home. They need to be safe when they go to school. And my goal is it never happens again in Florida. We worked hard to pass legislation that, move the ball down the court to try to make it safer for all parents and all kids.
You raised the age to 21.
Yeah, so what we did was, one, we said all of our schools are going to have law enforcement officers. Number two,
how are you doing with that?
They're required to implement it by the school year, but they were already implemented as soon as this happened. And we actually, even at the school there, Stoneman Douglas, we provided highway safety right afterwards because the parents didn't think there was enough right afterwards, so I added highway patrol. But number one, all of our schools are going to have law enforcement officers. Number two, more mental health counselors. Number three, we gave them more money. We're already giving them money every year for hardening, bulletproof glass, metal detectors, fewer entrances and exits. Number four, we said if you are threatening harm to yourself or somebody else through a court process with due process, you're not going to have access to a weapon. And you shouldn't.
No, I mean, that's such a huge part of this. What about accountability of the sheriff, the police officers who went to his house 27 times, the security guard who ran away? Where's the accountability for the government arm that really failed your school?
What about the FBI?
Yeah.
That were informed twice. One time, very specifically, 5 weeks ahead of time. It infuriates you about the accountability. So here's what I was able to do. With regard to the sheriff's office, what we did was we have an investigation going on, independent, by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. And they're going through, the way they do it. They start with all the videos and they start doing all the interviews to find out exactly what happened. As governor, if I find malfeasance, then I have the opportunity to hold people accountable, and I will.
Meaning they'll be fired.
Yeah, absolutely. But here's what's frustrating to me. Have we heard anything from the FBI?
No.
Nothing. Now think about it. I've had 3 shootings.
Incredible.
I had the Pulse, I had the airport, and I have had this. And to this date, as far as I've not heard of any accountability. So I believe in accountability. What we do it with our families. And so I'm going through a process in the state, a thorough investigation. We will hold people accountable.
All right. I want to ask you a quick question about the election and somewhat peripherally related, because you're running for Senate against Bill Nelson, who's been the Democrat senator for many, many years from Florida. There's a lot of people who have moved from Puerto Rico to Florida after Hurricane Maria. And there are efforts by the Democratic Party to sign them up as Democrats because most of them do not choose a party affiliation. Is that going to have an impact on the Florida election?
Well, first off, anything that happened with Puerto Rico should not be about politics. I'm going back there tomorrow for my sixth visit, and I'm going back there to try to help them. I work with the governor. Governor Sell, he invited me back again to say, how do we help you get your economy going?
Do you believe these new numbers from this study that 4,600 people lost their lives in that hurricane, not 64 or whatever they initially said it was?
Whatever the number is, it's. I mean, it's horrible. We went through Irma, and my whole goal, that whole hurricane, was I want to keep everybody alive. We can rebuild your house, but we got to keep you alive. And so, whatever the number is, you don't want anybody to lose their life. That's why I've taken utility companies over there. I've worked with everybody to say, how do we get Puerto Rico back running again? And all the Puerto Ricans that came to Florida, how do we get them a job, get their kids in school, make sure they're part of our community? We're a melting pot. We're the best melting pot in the world.
Thank you. I want to talk to you more about the campaign, but we're going to have to save it for next time. Thank you so much. It's good to have you here tonight. So coming up, an ex-NFL football player is suing his former university, Michigan State. And, they've had a lot of problems lately with all of this. And he says that unproven sexual assault claims have ruined his life and his NFL career. You will hear from him personally. Keith Mumphrey and his attorney join us next. And this just in, the very first photo of, you knew there was going to be a photo of this, right? Kim Kardashian and President Donald Trump in the Oval Office. Mike Huckabee says this is actually very serious stuff. And he's up next on that.
So far, the White House has been really receptive to my calls, and I'm grateful for that. And I'm not going to stop that because